Hello and welcome to Tim's BMW repairs and information. Yeah, I'm sorry, we're still fiddling with little BMWs. We'll be back to the big ones again next week, I promise. But today we're changing the spark plugs on this 118i 2-litre M Sport BMW E81 1 Series. And for the avid viewers of my YouTube channel, you'll know that this car is dead. It is deceased, it is no more. Unfortunately, it was driven into a flood, slurped up some water, popped a hole in the top of a piston and bent a con rod. So that was the end of that, I'm afraid. Dead as a dodo. Probably a 1 metre cube of metal by now at the scrapper. But never mind about that. I've changed the spark plugs last week before that happened, and we can go through the whole routine. Which tools to use, what sort of pitfalls you can have, and you can, and I certainly did have problems with cylinder number 4. But we'll go through all of that when we get to it. But first, get the plastic off to hold the microfilter housing in. That's the housing I'm taking off there. Holds 2 microfilters, or is it one big long one? I can't remember. But if you want to change your microfilter, that has to come off. Yep, so 6 coarse threaded bolts. Only need a screwdriver type socket. Don't need a wrench on or anything on those, and don't tighten them up too much when it all goes back together. Otherwise you'll strip the threads. It's only going into plastic and sheet metal, if I remember rightly. So yeah, that's the microfilter unit off, and we get the usual leaves and stuff in there, same as I do in my 6 Series. Off with the weatherproof strip, and then we just got to get these plastic covers off, one for the e-box, one for the brake stuff, and there's a clip each side of it and a rubber sort of bit that goes at the end of it. Never quite sure what those things do, but you push them off the end and you can get the covers off. So yeah, both covers off, and yeah, then we move on to the tray itself, which is held on by 2 fine threaded M8 bolts, so don't get them muddled up with the other 6, otherwise you could come a cropper quite easy. So yeah, 2 of those off. And before we pull the tray off, we have to get the sensor wiring off. That's if I remember, because I've done this before and tried to pull it off with all the wires still on there. We need to get to a big Torx bolt underneath there, so I might as well take that cover off there, which is a screwdriver type fitting. Just turn it a few degrees anti-clockwise. There's these carriers for the pipework, which goes between the left and right sides of the motor. 2 of them, so just they unclip from the tray. And oh yeah, looks like I remembered this time. So pull off the connector from the sensor, and there's 2 little clip things which hold them in place. So yeah, pull that off. Small screwdriver, poke it between the sheet metal and the clip, and they'll pop out quite happily. And once you've done that, just sort of dangle it off over the side of the car, and then do the same to the other. So disconnect 2 clippy things. I'm trying to be brave and pull it off without a screwdriver. I should have used a screwdriver. We are coming back with an even bigger one this time. Look at that, not messing about today. Should have used the little one, really. It's a lot easier. And now the tray can come off. Sometimes it needs a bit of a pull because it gets stuck to the rubbery bit behind, but it came off without any problem this time. Then 2 big Torx bolts. They're male Torx, so need a female socket for them. Quite a small one here, doesn't take much effort to get that one off. The one in the middle is a bit harder, so I'm using an extension, well, a part of a microphone stand if I remember correctly, on my wrench, and it's much easier using a long extension because you don't have to put so much effort into it. You can just sort of lean against it and it'll undo. So those are done up pretty tight, so you need a bit of effort to undo them. And once that Torx bolts out, whiz it out. Once it's come loose, whiz it out with the socket, and then you can get that strut off. Just needs to be pulled out, and when it goes back in, it goes sort of through a rubbery hole, and it's a bit difficult to line up, but no problem at all really. So there we go, the big Torx is out. That one needed a bit of effort, and then that can come out as well. And that now gives us access to get the engine cover off. It's a huge amount of palaver just to get to the engine cover, but there you go. And then we've got 3 lots of Allen bolts that hold the engine cover off on, and 2 at the front, 1 at the back. Whizzing them off now. Also sped up the film a bit, but there you go. And then you take the oil cap off, and then you can get the cover off. So cover off. Oh look, I'm doing it again from a different angle. Still smoking away because it's only just got here. So cover off, and of course immediately put the oil cap back on again. And due to editing, I seem to be putting it on twice. But there we go. That's editing for you. Rightio, well, we can get there now. Right, at the engine at last, thank goodness for that. Right, the first thing we do is disconnect them by lifting up the front of this clasp. That will eject the connector. Even though drawing there for you to see. Now, if the clasp breaks, you can replace it because it is a separate part, but hold the side of it so it doesn't sort of splay out as you do it. I'm using a screwdriver to get the coil-over-plug unit out, but you can get coil pullers, and there's a picture of one there. I've always used a screwdriver. Just be careful not to damage the rubber skirt. There we go, that's the coil-over-plug unit out, and we'll inspect that and I'll show you how to do that later. Rightio, in with the socket. I'm only using a 3/8 socket and a short wrench. Shouldn't need much effort to get the spark plugs out, and if there's too much effort involved, as there was on number 4, then we have to treat that quite differently. But normally you can put a sort of 30 Newton meters on it and the plug will start going out. Yeah, the tightening torque on these, as they're 14mm, is around about 30 Newton meters, plus or minus 3 Newton meters, and it shouldn't take much more than that to actually undo them, so you don't need an extension on it. But you do when you do them up, and the reason for that is that all new spark plugs have a crush washer on them. And the usual problem when fitting spark plugs is if you don't do them up tightly, then they can come back out again. And problem is as they go in, the crush washer hits first, and then you need to put quite a bit of pressure on them to actually crush the crush washer. And you need to rotate around about 90 degrees from the start of the crush washer. But I'll explain what I mean in a second. So there's old versus new. The old one wasn't too bad, probably had about 50,000 miles on it or so. So it was quite happy, could have lasted a lot longer. So I always lubricate spark plugs before I put them in, and that allows me to tell when we're actually hitting the crush washer. Because what you don't want to happen is, as the spark plugs go in, they sort of bind up a bit, and you're not quite sure what's going on, you're not quite sure how much torque to put on them. But if you're using a lubricant, and I'm using a general purpose grease here, then it will lubricate the threads, and you'll get a much better feel of when you're actually hitting the crush washer. And it's quite noticeable as long as the spark plug goes in easily like it is doing here. I'm only putting hand pressure on it. A spinner probably would have helped a bit to speed this up, but there you go. So yeah, we reach a certain point, get the wrench on there, and then start tightening it up. And then we'll feel for the point that the crush washer hits first. And then what we'll do is we'll use an extension. So there we go, it's still going in quite loosely. And there we go, we've hit the crush washer. So this is the point where people just put a bit of pressure on it and leave it as that, because it does scare you, because putting this much pressure on, because we're getting up to 30 Newton meters, is quite a bit of heft on a very small tool and socket. But once you get to a certain point where it stops turning, and it's still turning at the moment, we've got a good 90 degrees, then you reach 30 Newton meters, and that's it. So the extension, everything's just bending at the moment. So that's it. We've now compressed the crush washer, and that spark plug is in nicely. Seem to have left my socket behind, so I'll wiggle that out in a minute. Yep, the problem with the crush washer situation is many people will do up the spark plug and think this is getting really tight. I've tightened it up quite a bit, so that'll have to do. But it's very important that the point where it starts to tighten up is that it goes about another 90 degrees and you reach 30 Newton meters. Because if you don't, and I've seen this happen a few times now, as the thing's always the same on the forums. I changed my spark plugs about 500 miles ago, and now it's making a horrible popping noise, and it's running on 7 cylinders, or in this case it would be 3 cylinders. And what happens is, if you don't actually squash the crush washer completely and reach 30 Newton meters, it'll come loose. The combustion gases will get onto the crush washer, and will distort it, and the spark plug actually becomes loose enough to unscrew by hand, and certainly loose enough so that the vibrations of the engine can undo it. And don't forget, there's quite a lot of energy pushing upwards on that spark plug. And what happens is it gets about halfway out, and then it blows itself out, taking the rest of the threads with it. And it usually takes the coil-over-plug unit out with it. And yeah, if you listen to the car, it makes a horrible popping noise, and you can be sure a spark plug's popped out. Now, in all the cases I've seen, oh, here's a point. That's an M62 coil-over-plug unit, and that shows that oil has got onto it. Now, on this design, with these coil-over-plug units, which are really tight in the bore, I very much doubt oil's going to get in there, even if you have a valve cover leak. But in the old days, this is what used to happen. Oil would get into the spark plug well, contaminate the top of the spark plug and the coil-over-plug unit. And even though oil is an insulator, what it does is it pickles the HT boot, actually knackers the rubber, and it becomes all loose and floppy. So we always inspect the coil-over-plug unit when we take it out, and I'm doing it up here in the top right. Yes, so make sure it's still tight on the spark plug and all the rest of it. I'll put in the description, I'll say which spark plugs I'm using and which coil-over-plug units I would replace if we had a misfire, and I always would recommend using the Delphi ones because they're a bit better, they have better longevity. So yeah, anyway, oil in the spark plugs, yeah. So yeah, unfortunately, if a spark plug blows out, then, and in all cases I've seen this happen on the forums, they've successfully managed to helicoil the thread. So it wasn't a disaster, but helicoiling a thread down a hole this big is going to be a lot harder. The hole's smaller and it's deeper. So yeah, it would be very hard. So it's very important that you fully crush that crush washer. And if you don't know the pressure by hand, then use a torque wrench. It's always a good idea. If you're not used to doing it, use a torque wrench. And I would have showed myself using a torque wrench here, but unfortunately the 14mm 12-point socket, which is the correct one for getting these plugs out, was 3/8, and of course my torque wrench is 1/2 inch. But yeah, use a torque wrench if you can, but for undoing them, use a short wrench like this, because you don't want to put too much pressure on the plug trying to get it out, because it is quite a thin-walled socket, and there's always a possibility that you're going to break something if you try to undo it and it doesn't want to come out. And that's why I mentioned the condition of the plug when I took it out. Goodness sake, get the extension the right way around. Was the fact that, okay, if I got to a point where the plug didn't want to come out, I'm not going to force it to come out, because there was at least about 50,000 miles still available on the spark plug that I took out. And I'd say to myself, right, well, I've put 40 Newton meters into this and it's not coming out. I'll cut my losses and leave that spark plug in there. And that's always the safest thing to do. If the plug doesn't want to come out, leave it in there, because spark plugs just seem to last forever these days. It's the coil-over-plug units which come a cropper, and they don't seem to last at all. So I had a quick inspection of that coil-over-plug unit. I looked for arcing down the side of it and made sure that the end of it, where it meets the spark plug, hasn't distorted and it still has a tight fit. And you might think that, why would the spark bother to jump down the side of the spark plug, which is about 1.5 inches, when all it's got to do is go across the electrodes? Well, it's the compression. Air is an insulator, and the more you squash it, the more of an insulator it is. So it does tend to arc down the side of the spark plug if the coil-over-plug unit is floppy and loose. So there we go, we're having a good look at that, and there's no signs of burning. It's not contaminated with oil, and that's good news, that's fine. And all four of them were the same. Right, we're going to skip forward a bit because we've seen this procedure a few times now. And what we'll do is we'll go on to spark plug number 4, because I did have a bit of problem with it. And it's a problem that you can have. And if you sort of reach 30-40 Newton meters while trying to get it out, and it doesn't want to come out, which is we're getting to this point here now. I've skipped over it, so I'm doing number 4. Got the socket over there, and what happened on all the other 3 cylinders is we sort of broke the seal, probably about 30 Newton meters, and then it started turning, and that's fine, and it came out. Well, this one isn't doing that. It's got pretty much stuck in there. So I've turned it probably about 40-50 degrees, and it's not moving properly. So at this point, the usual plan is to start screwing it back in again, try and work the thread a bit, because obviously what's happened is the thread's picked up. But before doing that, put some lubricant in there. Penetrating oil is best. The standard WD-40 works. And if you've got time, leave it a few minutes for it to soak in. But what I'll do now is try and tighten it back up again. Now it's not moving still, so I'm going to start turning it anti-clockwise a bit more. And the plan is to sort of move it anti-clockwise and clockwise to try to wear the oil into the thread, because you don't want to keep trying to get a spark plug out at this sort of torque level, because this sort of torque level means that we're probably damaging part of the thread. By this point it should have come really loose, and the problem usually is carbon deposits on the end of the spark plug, and as you pull it up it can damage the threads as it pulls up. Now, so we've noticed this, so it's taking quite a lot of torque to move it at all, so we're going to wind it back in again. And what we'll do is we'll wind it out and back in a few times, never putting more than say 30 or 40 Newton meters on it, which is why I'm not using extension, because with this little wrench I'll probably get, I don't know, about 30 Newton meters from it, but I'm never going to get to excessive pressure that will going to damage the socket or the extensions and all the rest of it. Right, I've swapped over to a better wrench now. The other one was sort of giving up a bit. So it's wound out, it's wound back in again, and I'm very happy because it's starting to loosen up, and that means that the penetrating oil has reached the threads. And now it's perfectly happy, and of course the threads on these are extremely long, about 1.5 inches of threads on these spark plugs. So we've got oodles of threads, but it'll be very interesting to see what the spark plug looks like when it comes out, because it obviously had a pickup point, and it will have had a pickup at the start of the thread. The spark plugs themselves are harder than the head is, because obviously the head's aluminium, the spark plug isn't. So what will get damaged is the threads in the head rather than the spark plug. So if we have a look at the spark plug, we'll see that there was a pickup on it near the starter, well, near the end of the thread, nearer the engine. And fortunately, putting the lubrication in stopped that causing a problem. So we can see, yeah, about 3 or 4 threads up. Yeah, there we go. Shiny, that's where it's starting to pick up, and the lubrication has stopped that happening, and the plug's out and perfectly happy. And you'll see that when the new plug goes in with its lubrication as normal, it'll just whiz in as normal. There's no damage to the threads or anything. And as I said, these are extremely long threads. But very important to reiterate, if it's that tight trying to get it out, don't keep undoing it. So you may eventually get the plug out, but you will have damaged the threads. Probably not to a point where the spark plug's going to pop out, but you're going to cause some wear to the threads, and that's never a good thing. So this plug's quite happy, whizzing in. Yeah, I'm getting worn out now, whizzing it in, and yeah, it's going in fine, and no pressure required to get it back in, and that's really good. We don't want it to have picked up a thread and left it. So extension on, just quickly whiz it back in again. So yeah, 30 Newton meters is the torque spec for these, plus or minus 3 Newton meters. There we go. That's very important. It'll go in quite easily. We'll torque it up, and really that's just about it really. Once it's all torqued back in, that's all 4 of them done. And of course we could have had a problem with any one of those 4 plugs, and we really just got to take our time. Take our time and make sure we don't break anything. That's the number 2 rule. Well, the number 1, don't kill yourself. Number 2, don't break anything. And so we managed to get past both of those rules today. So this one will go away, and yeah, that'll be perfectly happy. And really then it's just a real case of putting all the plastic bits back together, and off we go. Yeah, I'm a bit worn out. For goodness sake, I've been wrenching for hours. Right, that's the end of that sequence. Let's get the plastic back on. So yep, we just need to undo the oil cap, push the cover into place, refit the oil cap immediately, and then replace the 3 Allen bolts. And that's the engine cover back into position. Of course, between that and this, of course, I ran the car. Well, I ran it during diagnostics. I made absolutely sure I didn't have any fuel leaks, because that'd be pretty awful. So here I am putting the strut back in position, and I recommend putting the outer Allen bolt in, Torx bolt in first. So I'm just putting this one to keep the strut in position, because if you do this one first, which I did on another occasion, then the outer one can move off a bit and you can't get the outer Torx back in. So I'm just doing that up loosely, and then I'll do the outer Torx next, because it has to fit on a land around the bolt hole. You'll see what I mean when you do it. It has to click into position, and if you do the middle one up first, and then there's always a possibility to move out of the way. So put a fair heave on that, not a great deal. Don't need an extension. Definitely do need an extension on this one to tighten it up. I mean, it's not a safety part, but it doesn't actually do anything unless all the bolts are really tight, because it's meant to stop movement between the suspension and the rest of the chassis. So yeah, long extension. Yeah, it's my microphone stand again. Give it a good heave, and then put the cover back on. Screwdriver fitting, few degrees clockwise, and that's back in position again. Lovely. Right, what next? Oh yes, it's a tray. Now this is a bit fiddly. I've cut down the editing a bit because I swore a bit. It takes a bit of fiddling around to sort of push it in and click it into position. So I'm going making a heave, and I've probably cut out 5 minutes of it as well. It has to clip into the rubbery bit at the back, and you can hit it as much as you like, but it's just a case of getting it in the right position. So I'm going to refit the over-engine pipework again, and they fit into little slots, as you can see here. If my head wasn't in the way, it'd be a lot easier. Yep, so those 2 in, and then I'm pushing the tray a bit to the left, because the screw holes didn't line up on the left and the right. So I managed to shove it along a bit, and now those 8mm fine threaded bolts, not the coarse ones, go in here, and still using a screwdriver type attachment because that's all it needs. And now I'm putting back the sensors, so reconnect the sensor and then clip the little doofers back over the sheet metal. There we go, push that sensor in, and probably do the other one. Yep, off we go. So yeah, plug it back in and put the little clips back over the sheet metal and keep it all nice and neat, and then fit the other 8mm fine threaded bolt. There we go, that's done up. Lovely. And oh no, I seem to have done it in the wrong order, but there you go. Yeah, I'm refitting that sensor now. I'm quite sure what I was doing down there before, but there you go. There we go, reconnecting. Lovely, that's in position. And then the stupid covers on. Well, it's stupid because of the leaf catchers, which are to the left and right. I never seem to get the rubbery bit into the slot on this side for some reason, and I've tried lots of times to get it in the right place and it never seems to go in, so I just sort of make a small effort of getting it in. There we go, that's clicked into place. And then we do the same for the right hand box and just fit that into place. And I can seem to get the rubbery bit, the leaf catcher thingy, into the slot on this one, whereas I can't on the left hand one. Make sure the wires aren't being trapped, of course, and just push it into place. Couple of shoves and that'll go in. That's it, perfect. And then it's a case of refitting the weather strip. And don't do what I did here, which was I fitted it and then hadn't got it pushed fully to the left. So the trick is to actually start from the left. And you say, oh no, it's not working, I'm pushing as much as I can. Will it go? No, I have to start again. So there we go. And then push it just so that that floppy bit of rubber goes over the top of the weather strip, and then it will fit on properly, and do the rubbery bit on the right hand side as well. There we go, seem to have got that in position, happy with that. And then we refit the microfilter housing. you might as well have changed the microfilter while you're doing it, because they're cheap as muck and it's so easy to do once it's off. So we got another 6 coarse threaded 8mm bolts, using a screwdriver type attachment rather than the wrench, because you don't want to do them up too tight. It's only sheet plastic or sheet metal, I can't remember which. Anyway, that's about it really. So yeah, very pleased with that, and thanks very much for watching. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for all the comments. I always try and answer them when possible, and I'll see you next time.